multiple technologies. Okay, progress. Are we good? All right. Aloha, welcome. So nice to see so many of you here today on a overcast Sunday afternoon here for a really incredible presentation. We are so excited to share this presentation with you. My name, of course, is not of course, but my name is all day long. Yes, thank you for laughing. Is Thomas Seabird. I am the executive director of Friends of Kauaʻi Wildlife Refuges, one part of the partnership that helps produce this free lecture series. So we're delighted, goodness, to have you here. And many thanks to Maylette and the Princeville at Hanalei Community Association for partnering and providing the space for us today. Just a quick little ditty about us as a Friends group, if you don't know. We are honored to serve for the last 40 years. It's incredible. Our nonprofit has been around for 40 years of service to our 3 U.S. Fish and Wildlife Refuges, National Wildlife Refuges here on the island of Kauaʻi. So we were founded basically to answer the call, what do you need and how can we help? And we do that by providing staffing support and funding that helps fill in the gaps in the incredible work of our refuge partners. So those 3 refuges, of course, if you're not familiar, are Hanalei, right down the hill here, Kuleia, our lesser known sister in the backside of Lihui, and Kilauea Point, of course, the one refuge is open to the public and our shining star for visitor education. So as I said, within the work of answering that call of duty, we have a couple of recurring programs that we're really proud of. Basically, by protecting the wildlife that we support through habitat preservation, maintenance and restoration of those spaces. One program that we're really honored to help support is the rehabilitation of sick and injured birds with our incredible partners, the Seabird shearwaters, supporting our friends and conservation dogs in Hawaii. We have in the house here today, big cheer for those friends who are doing great work. Educating the next generation. We have part of our next generation in the back room here. Woohoo! It takes all of us to do the work and pass along the island in even better shape, hopefully, to the next generation, and leading next generations of conservationists to their excitement of the same work as well. So, of course, preserving our lighthouse, which we're really proud of, 102-year-old beacon for us all, and many more. So anyway, I want to thank Maylette for hosting us, and I want to honor, if you're not aware, she's about to switch hats on us, and but she has been a really stalwart friend to help develop this series and be a supporter of bringing an enhanced conversation around conservation here to the Princeville community. So I want to applaud you for your work and your partnership. Yep. As she continues in that vein with her work as the executive director of the Kauaʻi North Shore Community Foundation, now named
North Shore Gift.
North Shore Gift. So yeah, so we have lots of great excitement and future partnership to work together on. So thank you very, very much. Honored to have board members in the house, Deborah, board member of Friends of Kauaʻi Wildlife Refuge. Patty, a board member of multiple organizations. Krista with U.S. Fish and Wildlife in the back here. Team is part of our team, educating folks out at Kilauea Point. I'm not going to go on and on because there are many friends here, conservation dogs, volunteers, all of us, it takes a village to do this work. So thank you for being here, and thank you for your interest in today's presentation, which is what you're really here for, not to listen to me talk, but let me just give a brief introduction to the incredible speaker today, Dr. André Rainé, who is the science director for Archipelago Research and Conservation. And he has worked on seabird conservation projects on Kauaʻi and the wider Pacific for 12 years. During that time, he has initiated multiple projects to save endangered seabirds, particularly the a'o, or Nuo shearwater, and the wa'o, or Hawaiian petrels. Pioneering the use of a range of monitoring technology to locate rare seabirds in mountain regions and track birds to their feeding and wintering grounds. I've already got a peek. You're going to be in for an incredible treat with this presentation today. So without further ado, Dr. André. I lost that. We'll get you back here in a minute. There we go. All you.
All right, thank you.
Good job.
Yep. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being patient with us while we sorted out the technology. There's an amazing array of laptops and speakers here. So it's great. Hope it'll all work out. So yes, I'm going to talk to you guys today about seabird discos, and we'll get to that in a bit, and other conservation projects that we work on here on Kauaʻi. So the Hawaiian archipelago really is a seabird archipelago. We've got over 23 breeding species within the Hawaiian Islands, and that adds up to over 12 million seabirds. A large portion of those are in Papahānaumokuākea and the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, but still these birds call all the other islands home, particularly Kauaʻi. So here's some examples of our seabirds. I've got a black-footed albatross here. I was going to go for the Moʻolelo, the Laysan albatross, but you guys see them all over the place here, right? I saw one flying around earlier. So this black-footed albatross, we have them on Lehua. You can sometimes see them from the shoreline. Red-tailed tropic bird, red-footed biglies, and naughties. So we have a lot of different seabirds that breed within the Hawaiian Islands. It's a lot of different species to wrap your head around. And the ones that I predominantly work on, although I'm kind of more and more drifting into more varied seabirds, but the ones I've been working on for the last 12 years or so is endangered seabirds, and that's these birds here. So I'll just introduce you to them. Maybe. Yes. Okay, so this is the a'o. This is the Newell shearwater. This is the endangered seabird of Kauaʻi, really. We have 90% of the world's population of the species on the island. So this really is an important island for the species. It's called the a'o mainly because it's tall. So I'm going to break out my party tricks here. I like to do bird calls. So it's called as like a so I got one. So yeah, so if you hear a braying donkey which is flying over, it's not a donkey, it's these guys. And these seabirds nest up in the mountains. So if you look out at all those mountains out there, those beautiful mountains, that's where these guys predominantly nest, although there are some also at Kilauea. And then we have the uahu, the Hawaiian petrel, another seabird call. It goes ooh, wah, wah. This is our endangered petrel. So we have about a third of the world population of the species here on Kauaʻi. They have this big beak here, hooked beak, which causes some pretty impressive bites if you're handling them. The white forehead, which is different from the a'o. So that's our second endangered seabird. And then our third is this cute little fella here, the ake, which is like a call. This bird is actually a bird that was found by some guys playing basketball in Waimea last year. You can tell with all the down on it that it's a little chick, so it's just fledged and been attracted to lights, which we'll get to in a bit. But this is a really small seabird, endangered seabird. It's an interesting species in that it's found both in the Atlantic and the Pacific. But almost certainly it's a series of cryptic species that are hidden amongst that group because they all look pretty similar. When you look at these guys, leeches, storm petrels, and all the other storm petrels which have band rumps on them, they all look very, very similar. So recently there was a genetic study which found that our birds are very distinct from all the other populations and closest to the Japanese population. So possibly this is a subspecies, if not a species. So I'm sure more to come with these guys. This is the one which people are least likely to see or even know about. This is perfect. So this is kind of like a Where's Waldo thing here. It's where do seabirds breed? And so here in Kauaʻi, we have birds that breed, seabirds breeding on the coast and on islands like these guys. So there they are. We've got the Moʻolelo there breeding on the ground. Then when you get these sort of like rocky crevices and cliffs, you get the Volar's petrel. And then the uaukani, which is the wedge-tailed shearwater, they're found all in the coastal areas as well. Kilauea, great place to see them. You'll get wedge-tails all over the place there. And they really are probably our most visible shearwater. And then the other place where the seabirds breed, this is often one of these things where people they don't really picture birds up in these areas, but the mountains. So if you were to look at these mountains, here's the Kalalau Valley. There they are. So we have an a'o chick. These birds really like these steep areas. They've got very stubby wings. They need steep ground to take off from. And they'll be in these aluhe slopes. Quite difficult to find them because of the terrain. And then equally difficult is our uahu. There's that little fuzzball, it's an uahu chick. They're found also in a similar habitat, but more on the tops of ridges. And they'll be under ohia trees, lapa trees in aluhe beds. So those are the two sort of main habitats that we find our seabirds in. And so all is obviously not well with the seabirds. As always with conservation, humans have a lot to answer for. And there's a whole range of threats that we have to deal with these birds on these islands. So the first is introduced predators. Here's an extremely unpleasant picture of a cat throttling an apo at its burrow. This is actually particularly bad. This one, it had previously eaten that bird's chick. So it pulled it out, eaten the chick, waited for the adult to come back, pulled the adult out, killed that as well. So we have a lot of introduced predators on these islands. We have cats, we have pigs, we have rats, 3 species of rats, and also a predator which people don't really think about is the barn owl, which was introduced by the Department of Agriculture here in the 60s and has taken to eating seabirds as well. As usual, when you introduce one thing to deal with something else, it causes a whole bunch of cascading impacts. Secondly, introduce an invasive vegetation. So here we have guava forest in what used to be an ohia forest. Everyone really likes guava because it tastes really nice. You walk around the forest, you're getting tired, you pick up some guava and eat it. But this creates this real sort of dense sort of prison bars of trees, which the birds can't get through. And because they're nesting on the ground in these burrows, these endangered seabirds, they can't access those areas and they get pushed down. Power lines, this is a very visible human impact. We have power lines everywhere you look, there's power lines. We need the power lines because we need electricity, otherwise I wouldn't even be giving this presentation, so clearly electricity is important. But when power lines are put in bad areas where seabirds are flying at night, seabirds will collide with power lines and die. And then bright lights, you know, it's still very frustrating to me. You know, I've been here for going on 13 years and lights have always been something that people talk about. Everybody knows about lights, but you go to places, this place will not, I will not name this place, but bright lights, super bright lights. The seabirds nest up in the mountains, and when they're fledging for the first time, they're using the stars and the moon to navigate by. And what do they see? A constellation on the ground. So they get attracted to these lights, they circle round and round, and eventually they end up on the ground. Once they're grounded, they're basically dead. They get eaten by cats, dogs, run over by cars, or they just dehydrate or starve to death because particularly the apo, it's very difficult for that bird to take off once it's landed on the ground, once it's been grounded by lights. And the other thing is threats at sea. So there are seabirds, they spend a huge amount of time at sea in that vast ocean that surrounds us. And there's a whole range of issues that can face the birds there, from plastics, bycatch, overfishing, climate change. You know, this is relatively endless out there in the ocean as well. So they're having a hard time, our endangered seabirds. And so this is from a paper that we published a little while ago, which looked at how the birds are faring, the apo and the uahu. And the apo in particular has had this massive population crash. So these are actually birds that were handed in to save our shearwaters over the years. This is on a log scale, but these are a couple thousand back in a couple of decades ago. Now, this year was a particularly bad year for them. It's about 180. So it's been like orders of magnitude crashes of these populations. And so it's a 94% population decline since 1993. And that's not only from the shearwaters that are being bought in to save our shearwaters, but we also do radar work around the island and we're seeing the exact same trend. We pick up the birds flying over using radar and they've declined at exactly the same rate. So apo have declined by over 90% and uahu by 78%. So both species are not doing well. So first step when you're trying to protect endangered seabirds is find them. And if you think these are the kind of habitats that they like to nest in, so this is the back of Aiahuakua Valley, this is over the top of, I think, Ababakui. So they are somewhere in amongst all that, and so we've got to find them first. So the first thing we do is we go up into these areas, we do a lot of exploratory work, into remote areas where we presume the birds probably are based on either historical records or the habitat. Set up a little tent. And then we use, I'm looking very serious there, very serious, using thermal and night vision because birds are coming in at the dark. So we set up and we start doing our night surveys as the mist rolls in, and then hopefully the mist goes away because you can't use night vision in mist. Then you get this beautiful sky, and then the birds come in. And it's pretty amazing. Some of these areas still have a lot of birds flying around them, and they're sort of like all calling. like fluttering around. It's really cool. And you're just, up there on your own little red ridge spot, just listening to birds and figuring out where they are. So then we map them. We're like, okay, well, there's a lot of birds flying from that ridge, that area there. This is where we're hearing them. And then we go and look for them. And the end result, and it's not that easy. You don't just go click a button and there they all are. But over time, we start finding our birds. So here's a little Kauaʻi chick. Here's an Aho chick. I wasn't looking particularly pleased to be being photographed. But so they're in these little holes under the ground, and some of them can be 6, 7, 8 feet deep in these holes. So we're just like trying to find these birds and figuring out where they are and mapping them. The other way, so some of these areas you just can't access on foot. Those jungle, the forest up there is hard to work in, but even more challenging is the Na Pali coast. And so here we've developed these little, we call them Easter egg baskets. You attach a acoustic sensor to them, and then you drop them via helicopter on these bridges, leave them for a couple of months, come back, collect them, and then you listen for calls. As you can see, not exactly the largest landing sites to land on. I used to actually use a grappling hook, so I'd lean out with the grappling hook and lower them, and then I was no longer allowed to do that. So now I actually have to get out of the helicopter, which is even more alarming. Like crawl along this bridge line, trying to put this thing down. But yeah, and this is what we end up with. So we have this year, I think we had 28 out along the Na Pali coast. So you get these call rates, these are the calls per minute of an Aho. And then when you look at a map like that, you're like, okay, well, there's a lot of birds there. There's not so many birds there. So you can figure out where, management should be, which values should be concentrating on. So that's finding them. How to protect them. So there's a lot of ways to protect these birds, thankfully. So the first is management. And so we actually we have 9 management areas at the moment. They're all in the Northwest. The reason for this is because if you look at a map of where people are on Kauaʻi, the Northwest has the least people and the least human activity. So this is where the birds really are concentrated. This is Na Pali Natural Area Reserve. We have Archipelago Research, which is owned by NTBG, National Tropical Botanical Gardens. And then more state land here, Honapu, and we have a couple of social attraction sites, which are our discos, which I'll get to in a minute. But these are these areas, so really sort of mountainous, quite challenging terrain to work in. And the key things that we do here are, firstly, mapping the birds, figuring out where they are. So that's with those auditory surveys and finding the burrows. So here's a map of Aho distribution in Upper Limahuli. All these are burrows that we've identified, and all the blue shading is aerial activity and ground falling. So we know there's a lot of birds up there, just right. And then we go 7 or 8 times a year, and all these burrows that we found, we check their contents. So what we're doing is we're finding out, okay, is that burrow active? If it's active, did it lay an egg? If it laid an egg, did the chick hatch? And if the chick hatched, did it fledge? So we're getting reproductive success rates from this kind of work. And then we're also using those acoustic sensors, which I showed earlier. And those are great. We just deploy them across the whole management site. So they create like an oral net. And then they measure the call rates across the whole site. It's sort of a measure of the health of the site over time. More calls equals more birds. And again, we're also using a lot of cameras. So on each of our sites, we have 30 cameras out. And we're using those cameras both to see how the birds are doing and also assess what the predators are up to. And then the most important way to protect the birds in these colonies is predator control, 100%. Invasive plant control is really important too, but first things first, you have to get rid of these invasive predators because otherwise everything's dead. It's as simple as that. So ungulate fences, keeping ungulates out, cat traps to remove the cats, and these good natured rat traps, which are from New Zealand, which I don't know if everyone knows these things, but they're an automatic rat trap. Has bait up in here, rat goes for the bait, has a little piston, the piston goes boop, like that, rat drops down, end of rat, more rats come in, and so on and so forth. This thing can take out 24 rats before it needs a reset. So these ways of controlling the predators is absolutely fundamental to protecting the birds and the colonies. And the first Aho I found and the first Uahu I saw on Kauaʻi were both dead, eaten by predators. So that was my introduction to these birds. And these colonies were terrible places. You'd walk around, you'd find dead birds everywhere. It's absolute slaughter. But with predator control, things are changing dramatically. So it's really awesome to go to work on a long-term project and see that actually, you know, the management works actually have an effect. So North Bog, for example, this is rat predation on chicks. I went from a high of a quarter of all of our chicks eaten by rats in that year. And now we're down to 0 to 3%. So that just knocking this rats back has a major effect.
Right.
Yeah, it's really, really good. And we can see on the flip side, the birds responding. So here's our reproductive success rates, 50%, 38%, and now we're up to like 80, 90%, which is amazing for birds like this. And this is because they're not being eaten anymore. And likewise with the acoustic sensors, you can see here, these are the call rates of Kauaʻi at North Bog, which is the place where the rat predation's gone down. And over time, you start seeing more and more birds. And actually all of our sites, every year, it's like an annual increase in call rates, which is really, really cool. In fact, we're getting to the point now, there's so many birds calling on some of the units that the units they're going to reach a threshold where they can't record anymore because it's not physically possible for them to fit so many calls into the recordings. That's a really good problem to have.
Yeah.
So we're going to play a video here now. We're going to try to sync. So we're going to try to sync it so that the sound comes out of that speaker because it sounds pretty cool, this video. So basically the reason I'm sharing this video is because, you know, through all the predator control, we start seeing more things like this. So this is an Oahu in its burrow. We got this video this year. This is the first time we've actually got to film inside a burrow. And what you're going to see is this bird, she's been incubating, her and the mate have been incubating off and on for over a month. And this we actually call it the moment of hatching here. So you can start hearing the chick. From the moment that chick started keeping up, the moment it first emerged there, it was 14 hours. And then from the moment it like started keeping to actually appearing out here, she's helping with the egg there. It was another 2.5 hours before the solar chick was actually outbound. Right now, it was this chick's hungry. Well, sometimes my kids are like this. Just like, okay, all right, okay. I don't feel like that though. Lots of tons of vegetarians to be part of that. Yeah, that's pretty amazing now. We're really, really pleased to get that footage.
They have more than one egg.
No, it's just one egg, and if that egg fails, that's the end for the season. So everything, all the investment is into this little bundle here. And if it fails, or if it gets attracted by lights and ends up on the ground, that's an entire generation wasted there. All right, well, that was. And we got that timing perfectly. Okay, so Seabird discos. I don't know if anyone's a Simpsons fan. I am. Here's Disco Stu. He's my embodiment of Seabird discos. So I'm going to explain what those actually are. So basically, you saw that earlier we have those fences which are keeping pigs out, the ungulate fences. What we do in these cases is we create a predator-proof fence, which is this, which is now around Kilauea. You can see the one around Kilauea. And this fence won't allow anything in, so nothing can get in, not even the smallest mouse. And then we start making the site interesting for the birds. So here we've got decoys of Aho. This is at our site in Kauaʻi. And this is Hana. We used to get 2 of these sites on the go now. And then within the site, we build it up. So we basically build this disco for the birds. So we've got our speakers, which are playing the calls for Disco Stu and his friends. And then we've got these burrows set up all over the place, cameras. And then the idea is to just start broadcasting the calls of the birds, because the birds are very, very social. So when they start hearing the birds, other birds calling, all these birds that are coming back to the mountains to set up shop are like, oh, there's a big party over there. Hey, hey, how's it going? So then they go and they land in this area, and we want them in that area because it's surrounded by a predator-proof fence. So it's platinum level protection here. And so I think Okay, so do you have that video? You're ready? Okay, so before you play. So this is a video of the site, and it's amazing how quickly the birds respond. So the first year we played these speakers on one of our sites, we had 4 sightings of an aho, and then this year we've had over 500. Wow. So that it's amazingly quick. If the site is situated well, you start getting birds. Here we go. Okay. They can't help himself. Yeah. He's like, where is it? Now he doesn't like everything how they're nice. Totally expanded. And the colors in the background are figures, so these are the founding background of the figures. Thank you. Yeah. So he's also picking up the decoy. Right, so I can move on now. Yeah, so it's really exciting, and you know, this year we had in Hanapu, we had that bird using a nest box. And in Kauaʻi, we had 2 birds digging their own boxes or their own burrows. So we're really hopeful that next year we'll start seeing maybe the first egg being laid. And the idea with making the nest boxes, the birds, it takes them a couple of years to dig their burrows. And so if you create a box for them, you're already putting them ahead 2 years. So that's 2 extra years of producing a chick. So that's the discos. So another project that we're working on, which is a really special project, is the Nuʻolelo Seabird Restoration and Ecosystem Monitoring Project. We have a whole bunch of partners with this, in particular the Na Pali Coast of Hana, American Birds Conservancy, the state, and Halics, who do all the predator control out there. This site here, this is Nuʻolelo, so this is on the Na Pali coast, an extremely special place. You can see basically that it's this area of coastal area surrounded by cliffs. So the cliffs are acting kind of like a fence. They're keeping a lot of things out. Yeah, and so the idea behind this is seabirds have always been a really important element to Hawaiians and Hawaiian culture. And Nuʻolelo was back in the day a Hawaiian fishing village. So it is an extremely important cultural site, loads of cultural structures and archaeological structures. So and the Ohana have spent decades and decades restoring it. So it is like one of those places. I'm not a particularly spiritual person, but when I go to Nuʻolelo, you feel this sort of wonder of this place. And seabirds have always played an important role with Hawaiians in terms of either food. So they use the Hawaiians here actually used to eat aho, attract them with fires down to the shore so they could eat them. They've been important right from literally from the beginning in their creation chants. The Hawaiian creation chant features multiple seabirds. And using seabirds for fishing. So when you see these big concentrations of uaukani, for example, that's where people would go to, because they know that's where the fish are biting, even still true today. So what we want to do is, now that the site has been restored from a cultural perspective, is to bring the seabirds back as well. That's the concept behind it. And, okay, so there were some cats in this site, and the cats were removed. And I don't know how they got there, but they were there. So there were a couple of cats that were moved, and there were no seabirds nesting anywhere. The only place where the seabirds were nesting is up here. So there's aho and ake all the way up in the cliff, but nothing on the ground. And literally within a couple of years of the last cat disappearing, we started getting these burrows appearing. And oh, hello, there they are. So the uaukani totally start coming back in again. And here's the first chick. So within a couple of years, we have the first chick. And this year we have 5. So it's gone like 0, 0, 0, 1, 5. And it's, I mean, there's definitely going to be a lot of uaukani there. Yes, that one is one we banded in October. So instantaneously removing that particular predator, the worst of the introduced predators, the uukani start coming back. So the next step is to also use the same methods we're employing in Poakea and Honapu to start attracting birds to the site. So this area over here, which is this bit here, with all of the organizations have selected these areas as the areas to start attracting birds, and they're kind of furthest away from people. There's a lot less cultural structures there, and so you're not bothering anything when you're doing the work over here. And so what we did is we got kids to paint all the nest boxes to try to educate the children into thinking about seabirds and protecting seabirds and so on. They did a fantastic job. These are the kids from Island School. We got lots of alohas, Tommy aloha. And so we put all of our nest boxes out. This is the ake decoy. And then this does not have sounds. We don't have to worry about our multi laptops here. But so this is how we created these social attraction sites, and it took a lot of time. It wasn't that quick.
Okay.
Removing all this non-native vegetation, of which there was a lot, but leaving all the native vegetation behind, and then putting the nest boxes out and getting everything set up. So that's the first site. This is the second site. So this site we chose for the Bulwer's Petrel, the U, and the other one is the Ake site. The Bulwer's Petrel like these sort of rocky tumbles, and so yeah. Now the next step is going to be once the rats are removed. So there's still rats out there. We're working with Alex on removing those rats, and once they're removed, we can start attracting the smaller seabirds in. And I am 100% sure we'll have the same level of success with these we're having up in the mountains as well. And that's what the site looks like. So there we've got our speakers, our disco going, decoys, burrows, nicely set up under rock piles, and there's a good natured rat trap. So more to come on this one in the future.
Andre?
Yep.
What time of year are you having sound?
Yeah, so it's tied in with first arrivals through to when the young birds are leaving the colonies. So up in the mountains, we run from mid-April through till about the end of August. And the key is not to be playing these calls when the chicks are coming out, because the chicks are exercising. They spend a lot of time exercising outside the burrows, and if you're playing that call all the time, the barn owls are like, "Ooh, what's going on over here?" And they got all the chicks. So you got to sort of work it with the predator control. So preventing collisions is another really important thing. As I mentioned before, the power lines. So this is the power line trail. I don't know if any of you have been up there, but this one cuts straight across the island. And if you think you've got birds like out at sea, and the A'oniwa are coming into these mountains at night, and clearly they have not evolved with things in the air, big lines in the air. So these birds are coming through at high speed, and then they're just nailing the power lines because they can't see them. And so we've been working again for a long time now to identify where these collisions are. There's thousands of collisions going on this island. And so we've mapped out where they all are. We use the acoustics. So we measured with those acoustic sensors, the same boxes. You can hear the sound of a bird hitting a power line, which is a horrible sound. So we mapped that over the whole of the island. And the good thing and the good news is that you can really pretty quickly see the worst areas. So like here, power line trail is really bad. This area down near Hanapepe, really bad. And so we can identify the areas where we should really work quickly with minimization. And so we've been working really for a long time now with KUC, and they've been doing a fantastic job in the last few years of minimizing these power lines. So the first thing is to remove power lines. This is the non-technical way that you remove the power line. This is not what they do. I want to qualify that. Not most things. Do not try that. But removing the power lines entirely, because if the power lines aren't there, clearly the birds are not going to fly with them. It is extremely expensive to do though, and very logistically challenging. So the other thing, and I'm sure everyone sees these now, is putting these diverters up. So these diverters, which have now, KUC, I think more than anywhere in the world, the percentage of their power lines that now have diverters on them like far supersedes anywhere else in the world. So these diverters are up everywhere now. And they're still going, so there's still some areas to do, but the line share is now done. And the idea is you can see like these things make the lines more visible. And all you want to do is give those birds just a little bit more time to see the lines as they're bombing towards them to divert up and over them. And so we've been, now that the birds up, we've been studying this, and they're extremely effective. So that's great. So we're seeing collisions going way down. which means more birds. And some of these are these sort of reflector ones, which is most of the ones you see around here. And then up in the Powerline Trail, we also have LED ones, which are blinking. And so that makes it even more visible. And yes, we did look at whether or not those were light attraction risks. So what you don't want to do is attract birds to light, and they're not.
You have numbers when you say a lot of reduction, it used to be something like 1,200 a year or something, right?
Yeah, Mark's actually in the process of calculating that, but we've seen collisions going down in some areas by 60–70%. And the other thing is just removing that top line. There's a section of line that we used to, the one that leads through Na Pali, we used to get bird underneath that every year. As soon as that top line went, we have never seen another on the ground.
That's not a functional line, right? I mean,
It's the static lines for lightning strike. But it's not a problem here. So they've just that's one of the other things, just get rid of that static line, because static line doesn't really do much, and that's where a lot of the birds are hitting that top line, because they're like coming across, and that's the first line. That's the line in their flight zone.
So are you getting real full cooperation with Electric now?
Yes.
Everybody's
Yeah, it's I in the last 3 or 4 years, it's been, you know, they've really gone all into just minimizing the
You folks, this has gone on for decades, and it's been known for decades that these birds have been dying by the thousands, and nothing, and they all knew the information, and it took a long time to get into that. André has stuck through this. He went beyond any reasonable person.
Yeah, it's been really good to see in the last few years this like minimization just going. Casey's gone all into minimization, because clearly if you don't have birds in the lines, then you have a problem, right? And it's really apparent. You just drive around the island and there's the diverters everywhere, so it's really good to see.
André, was there, is it essentially a Perseverance, the team, but also I was on Island 3 to 4 years ago. Was there a change in?
Well, it's they're signed up to a habitat conservation plan, which they're in the process of finalizing. And I think in the last few years, they're like, okay, that is definitely a problem. This is how we're going to deal with it. And so it makes a lot of sense to minimize those strikes before you get signed into your habitat conservation plan, which is a legal framework for protecting.
Rather than new leadership. Okay, got it. Thank you.
And some changes in staff.
Okay, well.
Okay, so another area that we're looking at is seabirds at sea. So this is particularly challenging because you know these guys they are seabirds. They spend some time on the land, like clearly they have to lay an egg on land. They can't lay it at sea and have their chicks, but most of their life is out in that vastness of the ocean. So trying to find out where they are is key, because once you know where they are, then you can start thinking about like what might the threats be there, and perhaps think about how to protect them out there. So we've done a lot of work with tracking over the years. It ranges different devices. So this is the geolocator. This is a very small device that just attaches to a leg band. It weighs under a gram. It's kind of a 150 kilometer radius, so it's not precise, but you can get broad patterns of where the birds are. Interesting, useful for identifying, for example, wintering grounds. Then satellite tags. So these will transmit to a satellite. So you never, once that tag is on the bird, these ones you have to catch them again. These ones, once they're out, it's going to transmit to a satellite until the tag falls off. I suture those 4 little surgical sutures to the bird's back, which does not hurt it. And there's surgical suture, which basically over time abrades on the tag. And eventually after maybe 3 or 4 months, the tag falls off. So it's not carrying it all its life. But this means that particularly with fledglings, where you're not going to catch those guys back because they're off they go, you'll see where in a minute, this will transmit information to the satellites. However, it's going to transmit to the satellites, you know, maybe depending on the tag and the time of year and so on, it could be anything from 50 to 40 points on a day. So it's like the bird's here and then an hour later it's over here. So it's really fine scale, it's GPS level, but it's not loads of points. And then the last thing are these data loggers. These are really cool. They again GPS accuracy, but they will take points as often as you want them to. So like you can have every 30 seconds, every 10 seconds. There's a trade-off between battery life, and they have solar panels on them. So it's a lot of fine tuning. There's actually a lot of like me taking this tag, putting it under my house to simulate the bird being in a burrow, getting up at like 3 in the morning, moving it out, moving it back in again, trying to pretend to be a bird to see like how much battery draw, like if you're going to record every minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes, what you want is those tags still to be transmitting when the bird leaves the burrow again, because you're trying to get tracks and routes in and out of the bird's burrow. So this is a very fine-tuned thing, and we use that for understanding how birds are flying over power lines, for example. So here's the a'o at sea. So feeding is pretty amazing. So this is all a'o. These are breeding adults, and they are foraging for their chicks. And you can see these birds are going up to, this one's pretty far away, but around 140 kilometers off the north shore of Kauaʻi. That's where they're getting their food. And so the adult comes back to its burrow pretty much every night. So you've always got an adult coming back and forth. Their strategy, and again, you're looking at their wings sort of short, stubby, they're flapping really frantically. The reason why is because they are diving, they're diving after their prey. So they can go 50 meters underwater chasing their prey, which is pretty amazing. So they are they're using like things like ahi to bring bait balls in, and then they're just plunge diving, going in after the prey themselves. The uahu, on the other hand, has these longer wings, and what it does is it feeds on particularly things like neon flying squid, and when ahi and ono and so on push the flying squid up to the surface, they fly. Before I worked on these guys, I was like, flying squid, I didn't know those existed. They do, and they're neon. Isn't that crazy? But yeah, they're like coming out of the ocean, and the uahu are taking them. But what these guys, their strategy, well, these ones are doing these short distances and coming back every day. These ones, you've got one adult which is foraging around here, same generalish area, maybe a bit further, and going back to feed its chick every 2 to 3 days. And then you've got this crazy other route. These guys the other pair is going 2.5 weeks away, going all the way up here. This is a really nutrient-rich part of the sea, stocks up on food for itself, so it's a very energy-rich area, so it stocks up on its own food, replenishes itself, comes back with this oil, goes back, and that's what you were seeing them feed the chicks. So they've got these two very different strategies. And again, once you know that's where the birds are, then you can start looking at, okay, well, is this in an area where there's a lot of plastic? Is this an area where there's a lot of fishing fleets, helping to guide conservation efforts? And then on the other side of the equation is the chicks. So here's a little a'o chick. He is not ready to fly yet. He has about another month to go. But what we found with these guys is once they leave the island, and bearing in mind this is a chick that has never flown before in its life, it goes 2,500 kilometers, this area. It doesn't stop. They're just like off they go. And this is this convergence zone here where you've got these two upwellings coming, and there's all this nutrient-rich upwellings here. And so these birds are all flying to this one area, and that's where they're spending the first few months of life. So again, like if something goes wrong here with climate change, for example, or there's a big pollution event or something, you could lose all of the birds, like basically straight away. And then the uahu traveling even further. So these guys are coming down here to that same intertropical convergence zone, then they follow it along, and then they end up in the Philippines. And so our uahu spend their first winter in the Philippines. And they also go into the South China Sea, off the coast of Japan, South Korea. This area has a lot of fishing effort, a lot of pollution, and it's particularly affected by climate change, particularly with the corals. The coral sea is in a really bad state down there. So I think this kind of information really important for helping to understand, the threats the birds are facing, the things that you could potentially be doing, but also understanding it's totally an international thing, right? Like we could do everything we wanted to here to protect the birds, and then if they go to the Philippines and everything's not going well there, then they're not going to make it. So that's, I would say, one of the big challenges for seabirds. Okay, so how can you help? You can help this little fuzzball here. So there's a couple of things you can do. The first is fallout. So like I was talking about before, the birds are being attracted by lights when they leave their burrows for the first time, and they're going to circle those lights, and then they're going to end up on the ground, and if they're not rescued, they're dead. And so if you, from sort of the end of September all the way through now up until mid-December, we get fallout season. So for the a'o, it really kicks off, the first birds are fledgling around the end of September, and then you get this big pulse through October. And then as those guys are finishing, the uahu are starting, and the uahu kani, and they're continuing forward until mid-December. So if you're here at this time of year, pay special attention at night for grounded birds, and you can actually collect them and hand them over to Save Our Shearwaters. There are boxes scattered around the island. Where's the closest one here?
Fire station. Fire station.
Okay, yeah, they're at every single fire station. And you can take the bird and put it in the little post box. It's kind of weird, like posting a bird. And then Save Our Shearwaters crew come around every day and they collect them, they assess them, they rehabilitate them, and then release them. And we did a lot of that tracking work I showed you earlier with the birds going 2,500 kilometers southwest. A lot of those birds southwest. A lot of those were birds that had come from Save Our Shearwaters, and what we found was that a lot of them do survive. So by rescuing and rehabilitating them, you are giving them a chance to continue their flight and survive and come back and breed up in the mountains.
There's a box and like one.
Yeah. So yes, do keep an eye out for them. So basically these birds are fledging for the first 2 hours after dark, and then sporadically through the night, and then for the first 2 hours up till about half an hour before dawn. And so if you're interested in searching for birds, then I would start around an hour after dark, and I'd work for a couple of hours, and then again in the morning before it gets light, because if you start searching in the day, those birds are going to be hiding and they're extremely hard to find. So the other thing you can do is if you see really bright lights and you have any input in the area that you're living, just be like, hey, can you, like, there's no reason to have a light. Like, that's the ridiculous light. You don't need that light. Obviously, lights are really important for people to see and for safety and security, but there's a whole bunch of lights you can use that are shielded, dimmer, that aren't going to attract birds and still keep people safe. So asking people to turn off lights and saving grounded birds is a great way to help. Second is cats and dogs. So I don't know if you guys have cats and dogs. This is my cat. This is Annie. Beautiful cat. She's an indoor cat. So cats, this here is a massive kill zone of Kauaʻi that we found at Shipwrecks Beach a couple of years ago. The cats and dogs together had killed over 100 breeding adults. And that's not the first time that's happened there. Since I've been here, this has happened 3 times. And it happens because either people feed cats, so people are feeding cats on the ground, they have a cat colony. The cats are going to do this if they're near a shearwater colony or albatross. That is what they're going to do. It doesn't, people sometimes like, oh, well, if we feed them, they're not going to do it. They are most assuredly going to do this. And dogs, so keeping cats indoors and don't feed them outside, that's like the #1 thing you can definitely do if you're a cat lover. And also keeps them safe. Like Emmy reclines like a princess on my bed, and she will not get run over, she will not get into a fight with another cat, she will not get poisoned, she's not going to be eaten by dogs. That she's nice and safe, and she's not going to do that, even though she would want to if she was outside. And same with dogs, if you've got a dog, keep your dog on a leash. Again, I see people walk along in areas where there's albatross and the dog's off a leash, and they're like, no, my dog wouldn't do that. Your dog is going to do that. So keeping your introduced predators safe and sound and loving them and protecting them, while also loving and protecting the birds, would be a great way to help. And lastly, just keeping informed. So, there's a lot of conservation organizations on this island. We all have Facebook pages. So you can sign up to all these Facebook or Instagram. We're now on Instagram too, and I'm sure all these organizations are, to see what's going on around the island and to learn about things that are happening here. And then you can also volunteer, like with the Friends Way Wildlife Refuge. Sign up sheets over there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, some organizations do look for help for volunteer work, and others are spreading the information out. So great to keep yourselves up to date with what's going on in the island, or getting hands-on work as well. So for me and the birds, mahalo for listening, and I'm happy to take questions.
When the ship split and went down to 2000, whatever it was, were there islands down there?
No, and so it's wide open sea, and they will not come back for maybe 2, 3, 4 years. So the whole time they're at sea. Yeah. And they'll either sleep on the wing or they'll sleep on the water, but sleeping on the water is dangerous because there's tuna, sharks, all sorts. So yeah, their survival rate, what we found, is very low in the first year. So it's only about 1/4 of them make it. So that's, it's all whittling them down, right? Like, the more birds that die here are less birds to go out to sea, but then those guys are also getting whittled down. So there's a war of attrition there. So here's the best place where we can at least boost the numbers up.
Where does your funding come from for all the work that you've done in Texas?
Yeah, so we have a range of funding. A lot of it comes from this habitat conservation plan by KUC. So the idea there is to minimize the number of birds that are dying, and then once you know the number of birds that are dying after minimization, then you produce birds So that's that they are helping to fund the management work that occurs up in the mountains. And then there's other funding sources like National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, Fish and Wildlife. We get funding sources from them as well. So through habitat conservation plans and other organizations.
And they're reliable, so you can plan for several years ahead.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about a habitat conservation plan and a great thing is that it's like either it's like a certain amount of time. So in this one, they're looking at a 50-year plan. And so that 50-year plan has all the management throughout those 50 years. So once that comes into play, then we'll know that the funding is available and how much it is each year. And that is also the thing with this is that, you know, all this great, seeing these birds recovering and seeing the numbers changing and going up, and inflation's going down. If you stop that work the next year, they're just going to be totaled. And it's going to be worse because there's a lot of birds on the ground. So there'll be more predators and a cat, for example, can kill like 10, 15, 20 breeding adults over the course of a couple of days, because the more birds that are there, the more choice they have, then they're just going to go for the most energy efficient parts of the body. So you'll see them just taking out the brain, taking out a chunk of breast, and then moving on to the next one. Yeah.
We have a question in the chat.
Question is, do small LED Christmas lights on a house present a problem?
Well, firstly, time of year. So Christmas time, there's very few birds still fledging, if any. So as long as the later that they're turned on, the better. But also, like if it's small Christmas lights, like you know, around the house, that's totally fine. But if the house is festooned with lights and they're beaming up towards the sky, you know, the more lights you've got and the earlier you're putting them on, the more chance there is that you could cause an attraction event. But it wouldn't be my first real concern for that way.
And Dr. Reed, so when we get a question or a comment from the audience, Zoom, those in Zoom cannot hear.
Oh,
So if you would please repeat either the comment or the question before responding to that.
Okay.
Would be
yeah.
Are the birds fledging kind of evenly around the island, or are there specific flyways where they fledge that we know about?
They tend to just, as they do the colonies, they head out mainly towards the closest towards the sea. So there's birds just coming out all across the mountains. But what is interesting is that when we track breeding adults with those data loggers that get the really fine scale points, they're all following single flyways back in. So for example, the birds in Limahuli, those guys are, no matter where they are feeding around the island offshore, they come back and they hit the Kauaʻi Valley, and then they cruise along the Kauaʻi Valley gaining height up Hanakapiai to Manoa, and then they come in this, all of them are coming in on this one ridge. So it's all related to the wind, because they're, you know, they need the wind to give them lift. So those areas get this huge lift, lots of wind, and that helps lift them up and makes it much easier for them to get to their burrows. But the chicks are mainly, they're just heading out. And then if there's bright light, that's where they're heading towards instead. Yeah, and they have a fairly asynchronous breeding season. That's why we have such a long fallout period. So between the first arrival we've ever recorded of an aho and the last first arrival of a breeding bird is 56 days. So that's a lot of time for that colony. And most of our fledging, you know, the real peak is the second and third week of October. But there's some birds that are fledging at the end of September, and we've had a bird fledge in 6th of December. So they're kind of, it's a long time.
And the geolocator is also how you know they've fledged.
No, so
Or
the
is that-
geolocator, so the satellite tags let us know. Yeah.
Thing.
And those ones, that's what we use for fledglings. We could fledglings because we're not going to see those.
Right,
It would be
right.
very unlikely to see them again. We have had a couple. But they're coming back and nesting in the mountains, and you've got to find that burrow that they're nesting in. But the geolocators, we've got those out on Aho and Oahu right now, breeding adults, and we're finding out where they're wintering. And so we'll be recovering those and getting their wintering grounds. And there's some really interesting stuff as well in terms of, you can tell when the tag is wet and dry, so you can tell when it's incubating or when it's a seed. And what we're finding, we're getting some really interesting information on incubation shifts with adults. Like, you know, the male actually incubates more than the female. And they do like up to 19-day incubation shifts, or they're sitting on the egg, not leaving in the dark in their little burrow, not going out to feed. And then the pair comes to switch over. They have like 5 minutes together. They're like, hey, all right, see you, gone. So yeah, it's really interesting information there too. No,
André, these birds also will regurgitate bolus before they go, is that right? Like albatross do, or?
no, so it's mainly that gap and liquidy stuff. But we have, I found one the other day, for that Kauaʻi chick, where it had a little bolus that left outside the burrow. Whenever I could open that plastic in it. So I think like, you know, if there's a lot of plastic in there, they might start chucking stuff up. But, yeah.
A couple questions from the chat. Based on the content of the presentation, Art does a lot of great work with Princeville so they're wrong species. Does Art do direct work with other species such as the tropic bird and boobies, or do these species simply benefit from the Princeville focused conservation work?
Do I have to repeat that, or have you, is that?
She's typing in,
So, but the gist of it was, do we only work with petrels and shearwaters? What about tropic birds and boobies? Right now, most of our projects are focused on those endangered seabirds. But we, for example, the Moʻolelo Series project, there's tropic birds there that would certainly benefit from it. And we are looking at other potential areas where we could start doing similar things to this, but with the non-endangered, because that's the interesting thing is as you become more endangered, you get more funding. But if you're not endangered, you have very little funding, but then that's a fast track to becoming endangered yourself. So it's like a horrible self-fulfilling prophecy there.
And another question, with the increases in avian influenza outbreaks across the globe, how has the seabird populations in Hawaii been impacted, and particularly the colony nesters?
Yeah, so yeah, avian flu is a definite concern. Hasn't been seen here yet. But everyone's keeping their eyes on it, and it does have these I mean, it's a particularly bad one for colonial species because they're all nesting close together and then they spread the disease that way. When I was in England last year, there was a gannet colony I went to, the northern gannet, which looks like the boobies, and there were dead birds everywhere at the bottom of the cliffs. So avian flu can wipe out whole colonies very, very quickly. So it's definitely something we need to keep an eye on and particularly be concerned with for colony nesters. But unlike forest birds, disease seems to be less of an issue for them right now. There's like we've tested malaria, they don't seem to have an issue with malaria. There have been some horrible pox cases seen in Oahu on Lanai recently, like appalling cases. But broadly speaking, it seems to be, knock on wood, not one of the things to worry about yet, but to keep an eye on.
Oh, yes, once the fledglings leave and go out to the feeding areas, have you got any, are you doing any work around trying to reduce the attrition once they have these feeding areas, and are working with the commercial fishing fleets? I know about the Philippines because I lived in Asia, so very difficult to do anything about that. But does your program extend to looking at dealing with the threats once the fledglings get to the feeding site?
Yeah, I mean, so far our main focus has been just figuring out where it is and then publishing it so that information is available. And bycatch, for example, doesn't seem to be a big issue with these guys. Like the Hawaiian fleets have to report their seabird bycatch, and I've been keeping an eye on that. And it seems to be very rare, if ever, that Aho or Oahu get caught on there, unlike albatross, which get caught a lot. But it is definitely a challenge because it's such an international thing. So short answer is no, not yet. We haven't worked on it yet, except for getting the information. Okay.
Please, go ahead.
I saw that I read a report that with the transmitters that as the veggies are going out, that they get attracted to the lights and sometimes turn around back towards the resorts.
Yeah, it seems like they can, it's possible they can be attracted up to 2 kilometers offshore and brought back in again. If you have a really bright light and it's facing out to sea. Sometimes we have seen, like on the coast, birds coming back in to lights and then bouncing around the lights over and over again until they come down. So yeah, just because you've made it offshore doesn't necessarily mean that's the end of the story.
So what about those resorts? Take down the lights?
I mean, I think we need to just keep on like saying to the resort, hey guys, like we all know what the problem is and there's easy solutions, and hope that they see reason and at least turn off these particularly egregious lights.
Are you following or monitoring the success of the Ihoku conservation project, and you're an early partner in that, right? It sounds like there's been some great successes of birds coming back and building a colony within that site. And I was just curious if that was anything you could speak to.
Yeah, so Nahoku is a translocation project, and that's at Kilauea. And the idea behind that was to take chicks from the mountains. And so rather than just playing the calls and drawing them in, to actually take chicks from the mountains, feed them just before they're about to fledge, feed them, and then they would fledge from that site. And they're very phylopatric. They will come back to where they fled from. Is the concept. Seabirds are they always come back to the place they breed from. So we spent 8 years finding chicks and flying chicks out of the mountains and passing them over to our partners who were then feeding them. And then the chicks are fledging, and they had a really high success rate with fledging. So most of the birds actually fledge. And it takes time because those birds, not a lot of them are going to survive. And then they're going to come back, and then it takes time for them to breed. But now we're up to 3 pairs of wahoo and the first pair of a'o, which haven't nested yet. But it's really cool to see. And it'll be the first, it's the first coastal colony of wahoo now, is that Nahoku colony. And they would have been down here in the past. It's just that, because of all the human pressures that we push up into mountains. Yeah, it's really cool. So I'm wondering right behind you. You come here. I grew up in Alaska.
The previous one, checking on the window here.
Really?
Yeah.
They're active participants in our series.
Always wants to.
It's always public, you might go into my account, guarantee I can remember everything you said.
Yeah, if you go onto our website, so Archipelago Research and Conservation, he's the acronym longer name. We actually, all of our papers are on there, so you can download them there. Yeah, and our reports. Yeah.
Dr. Dre, so the question is, you said, I'm not gonna reveal it, but the question is, can you reveal the name and location of the site containing the extremely bright lights included in one of your early slides?
I would just say, if anyone wants to walk around here, you'd be able to find it. And it's not hard.
Find the area.
I'm not gonna name and shame today, but it's pretty obvious.
With resorts that have lights that seem fairly obvious that they might be problematic. How does that mitigation plan that you were talking about with KIUC, is that a tool that can be used with the resorts to get them to be more sensitive to quality?
Yeah, there is actually the Kauaʻi Seabird Habitat Conservation Plan, which has a bunch of resorts and a cruise ship as well signed up to it. And they're supposed to prevent predators, introduce predators being fed on their property, removing them, dealing with bright lights, having a plan in place to deal with bright lights, searching for downed birds and handing them over to SOS. So there is a framework for some of the entities that had particularly bright lights on this island.
Is there a follow-up or an enforcement or
That's a good question.
a code for?
I mean, they have to report every year what their findings to the ESRC, which is the Endangered Species Research Committee. And then it's up to them and Fish and Wildlife and the state to decide whether they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. If they're not, what should they do next? So there's a framework for it.
Is that public information?
I think the ESRC committee meetings are, like, you can go online and see them, and they record them too. So yeah, just like an endangered species research committee, Hawaii, and then you can find their minutes, and they're recorded, and then you can find the ones that are related to the KSHCP, the Kauaʻi Seabird HCP.
And would every resort be required to be a part of this plan, or is it?
No, they have to like sign up themselves to it. So it was like open as like this thing is coming. Who wants to sign up? And kind of like some people are sort of like signed up, But then it's kind of closed now, so. Now it's like, well, there's a bunch of other people who aren't signed up to it. So I don't know, habitat conservation plans, it's an American thing, and it's an interesting thing because we don't have something like that in Europe. And so like the HCP with KUC, for example, is great because it's not finished yet, but through it, it's like minimization and mitigation are occurring for endangered seabirds. So it's a structure, but then it has to be regulated. And then it's up to the state and the feds to decide how to deal with it once once everyone's signed up and reporting every year.
So there's an organization like One Hotel is part of that, right? They signed up, they were part of the habitat.
As a thing, yeah.
So if they violated their own understanding of what the legal understanding of what they were to do, then justice could come back and sue them again, or.
I think every year they're and specific the first year since they were renovating, where they'd be producing a report and then they present that to the ESRC. So then at that point is when the ESRC and Fish and Wildlife and the state are like, okay, well, let's have a look at this. Have you done what you're supposed to do or not? And that's public.
So an organization who felt that they would make promises that they're not fulfilling to pursue the election.
I think that information is then available to everyone to look at. Yeah.
So, conservation dogs in Hawaii. Yes, we started this year doing seabird recovery.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And it was very difficult to get permission. People said, first thing they said to us was, no, we don't want you finding birds on our property because then we'll get sued. That was just an automatic reply. So thankfully, luckily, Princeville gave us permission to search this area and the library. And then we tried blue land, we tried other areas, we never could get permission for it. But we did find 2 mules over at the library, and one with our dogs found them. And one was found under the dumpster, and so we were able to get that one out. And then the other one had its head through the chain link fence and its body on the back. And our dog picked it up all the way from the stop sign and way up there.
Yeah.
They've done really well. I mean, the areas in cancer.
And those 2 were dead endangered seabirds otherwise. So right off the bat, that's 2 plus, right?
Yeah, we felt really good.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's like the way you're describing them, those grounded birds shows how hard it is to find them. If you're not like on your hands and knees with a flashlight looking under things, you're gonna miss a lot of them. Because their first thing when they land is to be like, what is that? Like, what? And then the light's there and then they're just like staring at it. And then they're like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. So then they go to hide. And when they hide, they've got a black back, so they're just kind of blending into the shadows. And then I've seen it before where an area where there's a really big fallout, and I went back the next day at dusk, and just as the light was fading, birds started coming out from all over the place. They were just coming out from where they've been hiding all day long. And the first thing they did was just go to the light that I grounded them and just stare at that light again. And it's like a tractor beam.
So André, the thing that Deborah just brought up, is that true? Is that if the property here, they don't want conservation dogs to come on the property to look for birds, because if they find a bird on that property, they're gonna get fined? That's not true, is it?
No, I think it's an interesting thing, right? Like the more people search, the more they're likely to find.
Right.
But if you search, you're at least showing willing that you're actually trying to do the right thing.
Right.
Whereas if you're denying, then you're not doing the right thing and possibly have something to hide. So you're not gonna immediately get sued because you found a couple of birds on your property. And actually, like having organizations like yourselves coming and saying, okay, well, we found some birds here, and the reason why is probably that light. That then puts you actually one step forward, because you're like, okay, well, I know why I can deal with that light.
Right.
And it sounds like there's a couple of lights in that property which should be
Right,
dealt
it's
with.
not nice to blame for a bird landing on the ground.
No. And I think it's education, right? Like a lot of people aren't doing this because they want, nobody wants to ground a bird.
Right.
Like they don't, but a lot of them don't know. Some of them know, some of them don't. And so like explaining it and understanding it. And we've had success in properties who have bad lights, and we talk to them about it and they're like, oh my goodness. And then they dim that bulb, or they take it out, or they turn it off during the fallout season with a shield it.
Yeah, I have to say, one of the properties we did get permission for was the dolphin. And when we went down there and met the people, they had already changed their lights, they had electrician coming in, changed the board. I mean, they were very good.
That's great.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
We got Honolulu Center permission, because there was so many cats there. I don't know. Yeah, any birds.
But I think properties that are allowing you to come on we should be like, naming them, being like, these guys are great, they're doing the right thing. And they're trying to understand how they can improve things, so it's awesome.
We're hoping to write a newspaper article in or something.
Great, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks for coming out, everyone. Well, thanks everyone online as well. Yeah.
With the appointment of PLS and 50 estimate the collaboration
Change to the tax effect. Yeah, so, we for the birds, the breeding adults, they always come back the next year, and they always actually raise their legend, and when they have the time on, while they have a check, they still have their legend, so it's trying to get them to use the lightest font they can, and you can place in the right places. So for sure, we're actually one on like that, so it's keeping a streamline, and then you want to see ideally under 4% or 3% of the population. And the genuine bidders.